All right.
Hey, it worked. Good morning from the land of technical difficulties. We're only 12 minutes behind. Hope we have some viewers, but if not, that's why we record and then post later. Joining us is Mike Dasargo, USCCA instructor. He's a man of many parts. We shall say that. I'm just going to leave it there. But really good to see you. Hi.
Likewise, man. So good to see both of you. Got to spend more time with you guys for sure. Thank you for
Yeah,
having me.
yeah. You did get to see my home at one point. You stayed with us, I don't know, a year and a half or 2 years ago or something like that. But it's been since then. I haven't actually seen you in person. We text a lot, but I was texting Mike and I was like, "Has DeSargo been on the show? I can't remember. Like we're like 5 years into this." He goes, "I don't think so." It's like, dude, we got to get him on then.
Yeah, we get distracted texting and talking about all kinds of stuff and all the amazing beers that you brew out of your garage. I've never had better beer in my life, man.
It's true. Thank you for the compliment. Maybe one of these days we'll do an evening show and we can all partake, and that'll be really fun. But anyway, why don't you tell everybody about yourself? Where are you, by the way, right now? You're from San Diego.
I'm from San Diego. I am in Anaheim right now, down the street from Disneyland, at a place called the Great Wolf Lodge. You can see the little deco back here. It's my son's 8th birthday, so we're celebrating out here, middle of the week. So it's a good time. So I apologize for the internet connection. It's a little sketch. Apparently, all the kids on the internet these days.
I don't know anything about the Great Wolf Lodge. It's not, I mean, I'm a member of the Elks Lodge, the Benevolent Protective Order of the Elks, and I think there's some loyal moose from Flintstones or something. Is that anything similar? The Great Wolf Lodge?
That sounds way cooler. It's nothing but like swimming in sewage. It's an indoor water park, and so chlorine's not supposed to taste salty, but it is. So it's good time. Skin rashes and the whole nine.
Wow, rashes! Great. That's next. Leeches.
Yeah, it's great to have kids.
So is it a saltwater park though?
Like no, it's a chlorine park. Ew. With lots and lots of kids. Lots of kids.
Oh. Okay. So maybe I won't put that on the calendar then.
Yeah, probably not. Probably not.
All right. Well, anyway, why don't you introduce yourself to everybody? Who are you? Why are you here?
Yeah. Thanks, folks. That's it.
And that's our show.
Live from the Great Wolf Lodge.
Yeah. I have so many projects in the air. I'm juggling. I was like, oh, shoot, it's my son's birthday. Let's just go. His birthday was on Wednesday, so we're here up until tomorrow. So, yeah, I got more projects we got to talk about some other time. Good times coming up.
Well, all right. So about you, though, you worked in private security for a really long time. I think you still do a little bit of that somewhere, but you're a firearms instructor. And Tovis says, we love Great Wolf Lodge. Apparently they don't get rashes in their family. Or maybe they're just immune to it. I have no idea. But you also, and this inflates my ego, you've incorporated a lot of emotional functioning into your training. I know you do like weaponless defense too, and situational awareness, and a lot of stuff that we really haven't covered too much on this show. So maybe we could give the audience a little bit of an overview too, and explain like how you got into this and what your multiple spinning plates are in your field and all that stuff.
Absolutely. So it was in 1977 when I was born. No, I'm kidding. So
back in my day.
Yeah. I started with traditional Chinese martial arts, not the stuff you see on movies and stuff, but my instructor was Chula Vista PD, and we were in a disadvantaged neighborhood, which is the PC term, we're saying the ghetto. Section 8 environment, the whole nine, good times. And both he and I were able to apply our skills. And at the time, we were really persuaded that it was that old rehearsal to mastery, where you had to practice thousands and thousands of repetitions to be able to apply skills in high stress circumstances. Going to fast forward it a bit, but I've been teaching since the late 90s. And I've always had difficulties reproducing our successes in students. And in 2013, I met a guy named Torrin Hill, and he has what's called the simulator, and it's essentially a panic room. He develops it's kind of like waterboarding, but for developing skills. He develops this environmental overload of stressors, both endogenous and exogenous. Yeah, endogenous stressors and exogenous stressors. We have this kind of what he calls panic powder. It's all legal, but it's a way to methylize norepinephrine, which is brain adrenaline. It crosses the blood-brain barrier, because we could always peek behind the curtain when we run simulators, when we run any kind of training environment, in the training environment. We kind of know in the back of our mind that we could stay calm because it's a training environment. But with some of the panic powder and some other things that we do to create panic, it really induces the production of what we call survival serum, the acetylcholine, the dopamine, the adrenaline, the whole nine. Funny thing that happened, it was kind of my happy place. When we were going through the simulator, I was like, oh, I remember this. And I took it for granted, right? I don't know how anybody else did. I just did my thing. And at the debrief, went out to have coffee. Of course, we had to like have a decompression time because it is high stress, all kinds of stuff running through your veins. And, you know, when he said that I did kind of okay, I gave credit, traditional culture. Oh yeah, I credit my teachers. I credit like the training method. And he just absolutely called BS to me. It was like, nope. You're missing the mark, man. You're missing the mark. And what really changed the game for me, because it sounds pretentious to give myself credit. It sounds arrogant to give myself credit. And he said, no, man, it's your upbringing. It's your lifestyle. Your brain hasn't been exposed to traumatic stress and violence. And so you have a post-traumatic adaptation rather than this disorder, where becoming familiar with that, it allowed me to wire in the memories to recall those memories. When I say memories, I'm talking about neuronal chunks of the different skills that I trained in. So every time that I've trained, in the back of my mind, I subconsciously visualized, and as I practiced those skills, I was recreating the context in my mind. And kind of tying it into mental health, it was kind of a form of prolonged exposure therapy for me. I didn't realize it at the time, but a lot of it was driven. I mean, I became an EMT. I worked for the medical examiner's office, picking up bodies because, I mean, in the environment I grew up in, the mantra was that like therapy didn't exist for us. That's like for white people. Like we don't have therapy or anything like that, right? And so we just dealt with it and tried to figure it out. So I worked for the medical examiner's office, trying to understand the nature of death and dying. Became an EMT because I hated the feeling of just watching someone slowly die in front of me and not being able to do anything, that kind of powerlessness, you know? And so I wanted to have the skills to actually intervene and stop dying from happening. The martial arts helped stop the killing from happening. So as I'm training martial arts, I kind of have that drive where like, I need to use this. I need to apply this. And all that to say that Torin broke it down scientifically, like, look, man, this is the way your brain got wired. That's the difference. It has nothing to do with the mechanics, has nothing to do with 1,000 repetitions. It has to do with the brain. And when I talk to you and you tell me about emotional functioning, of course, that's an aspect that society has never taught us. You know, there is a way to still be high functioning in a violent environment without having any mental health. And the old paradigm is putting it in a box. You don't have time for that. You don't have time to feel. So put it away. It's unimportant. It's irrelevant to right now. Just do your job, go to work. But that's not healthy. You know, it's not sustainable. It's not a healthy way to do it. You can do it that way, but it's not healthy. And when I talked to you about emotional functioning, that made me realize that that's an overlooked and extremely valuable piece by understanding the utility of emotion and being able to quickly process it and leverage it to our advantage. I don't want to go too deep. I'll let you take it away with the emotional function, particularly when it comes to anger, fear, the prominent emotions that we might feel, when we witness, say, our kid getting shot and the shooting is still happening. How do we make a decision from there? Because when we talk about defensive shooting, the vast majority of it has to come down to cognitive function. The trigger pressing part, that mechanical part, is just a moment in time, but everything that happens before that and everything that happens after that is all cognitive function. And when you talk to me about emotional functioning, of course, like we've never learned how to process that information. The emotions we experience is information that we have to process, and it can result in people freezing up. It's what we call a performance diminisher. And so when people talk about, can you do that under stress? I mean, that's a wide umbrella. What is the stress? Is it fatigue? Is it the emotion? Is it the environment? Is it the pressure to perform? And so, if you don't mind unpacking a bit about the different utilities of emotion that we might run into, by all means, you're the subject matter expert in that field.
And that's actually our podcast. Thank you, Mike, for joining. Oh my gosh, I got to go back. So first question is,
Yeah.
you said traditional Chinese martial arts, not like the stuff you see on TV. What are the names of these things? Because my boy's just enrolled in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and I'm just now learning about things. I mean, I've already known about karate and taekwondo and stuff, but what are you talking about here?
Yeah, I'm going to use the traditional vernacular, so I hope nobody thinks I'm CCP or anything like that. But stop Asian hate. So there's it's Tonglang Chuan, which is a style called Manus boxing. But I do have to kind of preface this a little bit. The Mao Zedong during the Cultural Revolution actually made it very illegal to practice anything traditional. So the real fighting arts actually left. A vast majority of real fighting arts left China and went to places like London, Philippines, Malaysia, Taiwan, Kuomintang. They all fled to Taiwan if you were caught practicing the fighting craft, because it was considered paramilitary training. And there was always a fear of insurgency. They completely banned any kind of systemized training. And so what you see nowadays was a product of the entertainment industry, back with Shaw Brothers and the old Kung Fu movies and everything, right? They permitted a certain amount of performance art, like what you see with Chow Yun-fat and Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, where they've really removed a lot of the practical application and made it more appealing for the entertainment industry. And that's what's become branded as Kung Fu, and everybody thinks it's complete garbage. And so there might be some people, like Wing Chun was very popular. That's a close quarter thing that hyper focuses on one arm's length away from the other person. And it gets you really good at that transition. And where Wing Chun tends to fail is that once you leave that context, then you're kind of useless. And so that's where there's some, when you take a bird's eye view on some of these Chinese martial arts, we can identify how it fails and where it's good. So we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. There's still a lot of gems in these fighting arts. And the fighting arts that I was in was Shui Jiao, which is kind of like, it's Chinese wrestling, and you could call it Chinese judo. Manus boxing is close quarters. It's very similar to Wing Chun. But that's what I started with under. And if anybody's not familiar with Chinese martial arts, they very much hyper-focus on mechanical precision. The difference between having your arm in this position versus this position, it has exponential effect. The problem with that is once you deviate from that, can you still be successful in applying skills? And so that's kind of where we want to look at what's best versus what's optimal. Kind of going off on tangents about the fighting arts side, but
no, I appreciate that. That's good. I mean, because it speaks to the overarching theme of firearms and the Second Amendment. Like if you get a tyrant in who comes and takes away your ability to defend yourself, and nay, extends that to the ability to even practice defending yourself without weapons, yeah, that's a great way to take over the people, right? And impose your will. And I also got to think that the historical significance of that is probably associated somehow with the pillars of tradition, right? And if they're going to deconstruct everything and take it all away and erode it back down to nothing, that's a great way for tyrants to step into, because if the community has no culture by which to anchor itself, then they can inject any, they meaning the authoritarians who are in charge, they can inject anything they want to be the culture, which of course is going to align with their motifs and modalities. So that's really powerful. I didn't know that. I had no idea, but it makes a lot of sense. So thank you for that explanation.
Yeah, there's kind of another tie-in with firearms. Everybody's heard of Fairbairn Sykes. Back in Shanghai, it was kind of the cultural epicenter of the world. And I believe, don't quote me to this, I'm not sure if Cooper spent time there, but I know Fairbairn Sykes created the timetable of death, because a lot of the violence was close quarters. And there was the Boxer Rebellion at the time. And those were during that time, there's an opium epidemic in China. China was considered the sick men of Asia, and the people that were healthy were actually the fighters. And so they created that insurgency through the Boxer Rebellion, and they had that true believer mentality where they'll eat bullets, but they will still come at you with their blades. And so that's where Fairbairn Sykes developed that timetable of death, because a lot of people were getting dismembered or stabbed. And so they're developing that timetable of death to see how much time do you have to still respond to lethal force and how long it takes to incapacitate somebody. But that's something that's often coded in law enforcement, in any kind of knife training or even firearms training.
This is exactly why I wanted you on the show, because you have a brain like a sponge, and when we just start to wring it out a little bit, it's like we could just like listen forever about any topic at all. So let's get into the panic room stuff.
Yeah.
Explain what this powder is. Do you ingest it? Do you inhale it? Do they throw it in your face? Like what is this? I've never experienced. I've only experienced OC, which is miserable enough.
And so we did sign an NDA because it's kind of like an M. Night Shyamalan movie where it's psychological, right? And so if we give away the core ingredients, it kind of takes away from the experience. Because when we're talking about developing brain and developing an experience, we have to minimize anticipation and predictability. But what I can say is that it's very similar to pre-workout drinks like Redline or the old, was it Fen? Things that affect your adrenal glands.
I thought you were going to say Four Loko, but yes, go ahead.
Four Loko mixed with a little Mad Dog. I'm sure that creates some distortion perception of time. But I mean, that's what I'm actually drinking at Great Wolf Lodge.
It looks like water, everybody. It's water. It's salty water. Probably chlorinated salty water.
I just put some panic powder in there. But yeah, essentially, if you methylize some compounds, it allows the body to absorb it. And the hardest thing about getting exogenous adrenaline is because our body responds to adrenaline differently. When it's in the muscles, you have alpha and beta receptors, and that's what determines the blood flow and how it changes blood flow. And so we lose blood flow in the extremities. So if we get cut, it's a survival positive in the sense that if a saber-toothed tiger was to slash our wrists, we have some time, it shunts the blood away from the calves and forearms.
It pulls it to the core, right?
Exactly. And so the core muscles, so you can prepare to fight. You actually get higher oxygenation. That's why we like to call it survival serum, because it primes the musculoskeletal system to fight or run at a higher capacity, but does the same thing for your brain as well. And so when you have norepinephrine, which is brain adrenaline, noradrenaline, if you're able to cross that blood-brain barrier, then it changes the blood flow to your eyes with your visual reference and creates kind of a slow motion time because your brain actually speeds up. What's really interesting is your frontal lobe, that speeds up, but your motor cortex is still in real time. And what I mean by that, if anybody's been in a car accident and it felt like they saw everything in slow motion, they're able to collect all those details about it. It allows you to make decisions faster about what you need to do. But what's super interesting, if you watch mixed martial arts, we see it often where people get concussed and knocked out. And so the frontal lobe is kind of offline, but their proprioceptive ability, their sense of feel and their sense of where they are in space is still functioning. And so you see it a lot where they start grappling the referees or people that's not the fighter, and very skillfully as well. And where that translates is to our technique selection when it comes to handling our firearms, right? The old using visual reference to watch the mag well. The reason why there's a risk of missing is the same reason why we've gone home and put the key in the key latch if you're a 90s kid. But when you put the key in the keyhole, you've done it a million times, but it's not until your bladder's full that you're trying to and you keep missing it, right? Because we experience different adrenaline peaks throughout the day, and that's just enough stress to make you move faster than what you're seeing, and you tend to miss the keyhole. And so that's the risk with reloading with a visual reference, is there's a discrepancy with the visual information you're processing and how it feels. So when you have it in the high compressed ready position for retention, there's people that say, oh, well, we could do it like this and it'll be automated over time. Yeah, that's the point. You don't need to see it. So then it's optimize retention and bring it into high compressed ready. So that way we have more control of the gun and it's still robust under stressful circumstances.
Okay, so why am I hearing about this for the first time? And like, why isn't this deployed everywhere with all first responders who would be in high stress situations, right down to and including possibly social workers showing up at somebody's home in the midst of a domestic conflict between parent and child? Like this seems like something that is a gold mine for anybody who had ever experienced something that outstrips their developmental capacity to handle stress. It seems like we should at least be floating this through most police academies, if not fire academies also. Like,
yeah,
is it new or that proprietary or what?
It's not new, it's not proprietary, but the Kardashians didn't teach it, right? And so unfortunately it's like the car culture too, where it tends to be what's popular, and we mimic the old war story guys, right? Because a lot of people have that appeal to authority bias, where when we look at things like the OODA loop, right? Colonel Boyd, for the audience that doesn't know, created a decision-making framework based on his experience of air combat, where he was trying to figure out how to gain an advantage over MiG-25s, if I'm not mistaken, is observe, orient, decide, and act. And to this day, people are still referencing OODA loop, even though there's more information available that we have today. And I'll get into that a little bit later. But athletic training talks about read, plan, do. We'll circle back to that. The point of me bringing that up now is that we tend to think inside the box. And most of our studies is based on that appeal to authority. Now, when it comes to the people that's actually doing the work, they use the case studies of law enforcement, right, where they can collect a lot of data. If they can collect the data from the military, they can use that as well. I have buddies in Naval Special Warfare, and they spent quite a bit of time with the new combatives program. My buddy Randy Rozelle was part of that. AJ Smith, Josh Amaro. There's a few people that during the administration of the time, the combatives was not as good as it could be. And so what they did is just beat each other up and figured out what works best under those circumstances. And that was the body of knowledge that they used. So when it comes to changing things that administrations write off, whether it's law enforcement or military, there now is the liability, right? If you change something, like when the FBI finally went to 9mm, like nobody wants to accept liability for that. But when a higher authority makes a change, then it's safer for other agencies and companies to actually start referencing, oh, FBI did it, so it's okay if we do it, kind of deal.
Does this sound familiar, Mike?
Yeah, right.
Oh, wow. Does that happen in the mental health industry as well?
Oh, everywhere. I mean, like, it's like pulling teeth just to get people to listen to the conversation of guns and mental health being in the same sentence, right? But then, you talk suicide prevention. My latest soapbox has been suicide prevention forever has been focused on training people to act in the time of crisis. When somebody is suicidal, know what to do, right? It's like, I just came out, like, I don't know, a year and a half, 2 years ago, and I started going like, this isn't working. Like, we need to train people to be well and not slide into despondency. We need to start studying that. The problem is it threatens the entire, I don't know, suicide industrial complex, I guess you could say, because it upends the entire mechanism. Like, the whole paradigm would shift if we're, instead of training people, not that we have to throw that out because that's a useful skill, but it's not useful for all of humanity. It's useful for very precise engagements, people who are in law enforcement, people who are doing emergency response, people who are maybe in schools. But to run like everybody and their mother through a safe talk or an assist training is ludicrous. But that is the model. And there is no model that says, hey, teach people how to navigate their emotions well. Hey, let's keep parents together in their marriages. Hey, let's get the kids off the devices, right? Like, that keeps people well. It maintains homeostatic health as opposed to response to degenerating into crisis mode. Like, the whole thing is inverted. And so I start talking about that, and it's, it goes over like a fart in church, like you might suspect. And same thing with what we're doing. We roll around SHOT Show, and we've got great supporters, and we like the people that we have, but there's still this overwhelming majority of folks who are just cool to the idea. And they're like, I don't know if I can touch that. It seems radioactive. They're like, right. Who do you need to hear it from then? And to your point, it's like, well, on high, right? Like, well, what would on high be? Who's the person I need to talk to? Because everybody we talk to gets it. They're not available. All right. Yeah. We'll take it back to the attorneys. The faceless attorneys, right? So this is very familiar to us. It's frustrating for sure. But I want to keep hearing about this stuff, the neurological benefit of training, and why what I've been saying is so important. Because again, teaching emotional functioning, people are like, yeah, emotions.
Well,
no, you don't get it. Like, it's a really critical neurological advantage that we have to know what our brains are doing in response to environment, and you don't learn it anywhere. And they're like, okay, yeah, sure, I'll watch your videos. They'll watch like one video, and they're like, that was cool. Like, but are you using it to improve your communication, to navigate life? Like, and then can you accelerate this, which is what you're doing in your training, so that you navigate a critical incident a little bit faster, right? Like, this is good, critical, granular stuff that I think people need to hear. So thank you for being a cheerleader, by the way. I'll let you continue now.
Well, I wanted to express my gratitude for you guys and it's an honor to be along for the ride because you guys are absolutely making a huge impact, even though it may not be where you want it to be yet. But I do feel that walking around SHOT Show, it is kind of becoming normalized talking about mental health. I randomly brought up mental health aspects with some people, and they seem to be a bit more open to it rather than the old school times of like, what are you talking about, dude? Are you a crazy person? You're talking about mental health. Are you going to go shoot up a school? That there's kind of that stigma of bringing up mental health, that there must be something wrong with you. You absolutely made a huge impact with teaching me about emotional functioning. That unlocked a huge training piece. And the analogy I use in regards to the value of examining your mental health is kind of like we've all hurt ourselves before, right? We might have hurt our knee, might have hurt our shoulder or elbow, wrist, whatever. And we kind of ignored it because we know that it'll fix itself, it'll work out, but it hurts when I do this. So then we kind of avoid that. And then years later, oh yeah, I forgot I'm not supposed to do that. That hurts when I do that. Or when it gets cold, they're like reminded that, oh, I have an injury there. That sucks. It's cold. I'm just getting old. We come up with all these excuses to not get that injury addressed. And when you actually do get that physical injury addressed, you're like, oh, snap. I forgot what it was like to have a functioning arm. I forgot what it's like. This is what life is like. Is this what it's like? That's how I see mental health, is that it may not be like a complete dismemberment. You might have a sprain, but then we get used to that pain. In my personal case, I didn't know I was depressed. I had no idea because I didn't feel sad. When you think about depression, it's often kind of like associated with being sad. I don't think I felt sad. I just noticed that I had less drive, less motivation, less enthusiasm. And then logically, I knew there were some things I was supposed to do. But underneath all that, I didn't realize that there was a metabolic side effect of that state of being, because our brain, it secretes all these neurochemicals that impacts what happens with your body. We can often see it with like some old operators that might have gained weight from all the cortisol and living a lifestyle of adrenaline, that we're always operating. The brain is still in that fight or flight mode, and that cortisol has an absolute negative impact on our metabolism, resulting in things like brainwave and metabolic disorder, where we're not able to metabolize food and we tend to hold on to fat because our body still thinks that we're going to fight to the death the next day, kind of deal. So if going back to the analogy of physical rehabilitation, once we address that, I got my depression diagnosed through a ketamine-assisted therapy. I have friends in the military has been encouraging me to go try psychedelic-assisted therapy. I had no idea what it was about. Never did drugs in my life, not even marijuana. Chula Vista PD didn't hire me because they thought I was lying because I never did marijuana in my life. I was like, I'll smoke a joint right now. That's what it takes to get hired. But I'm asthmatic, so I was like, why am I going to smoke something? But when I went through that, they were able to pinpoint. It's like, dude, you're not good, bro. Like, you're kind of depressed, man. And, I don't know if you recall, but I was like 30, 40 pounds heavier, if not 80 pounds heavier. I don't know. It's pretty obese. But the ketamine-assisted therapy brought me into my subconscious to things that I didn't realize was impacting me. When I went into it, I was like, maybe I'll go into childhood trauma. Maybe I'll go into my survival skill. Maybe I'll go into this or that. And it actually brought up something deeply buried within my subconscious, which is far more recent and more painful, because of the recency and the applicability to current time. And like, I was lucky in one ketamine-assisted therapy intramuscular treatment, transformative, absolutely transformative. I was like, oh crap, this is what it's like. I forgot this is what it's like. This is what it's like to have full range of motion. This is what it's like to actually be mentally like up again. Like, I didn't know I was depressed, but now I'm what's the opposite of depressed? Is it oppression?
Happy.
Happy, I guess, yeah. Because I mean, you know me, I'm a dork. I have a weird sense of humor, and so I'm laughing at everything. But that doesn't mean that people can. That's why I don't associate happiness and fun with depression, because I didn't think I was sad, but then my brain was there. I buried some stuff, not realizing I buried some stuff, because when things happen to us, like when we heard an injury, we're like, oh, I guess I just won't do that anymore. And then we just get used to that, and we ignore the pain, and we just are oh yeah, let me just not do that anymore. And so the triggers, right? We just avoid things that remind us of that pain. And I think the work you guys are doing is extremely important. And I also see the impact it has on training with cognitive function. I don't want to use myself as a case study because that's just an anecdote. It's just a data point. I use that conversationally because it works better in a podcast and going to case studies and everything, right? But everything that we talked about with defensive shooting is largely composed of processing information, and the emotional functioning that you mentioned, having an awareness of what these things indicate can help us sift through what we need to do and make better decisions about our life. This is off-range stuff that we can do to improve the likelihood of a positive outcome to a lethal force encounter. I'm rattling off a lot of stuff. I apologize if I go off on monologues, but just tell me.
That's why we have our guests.
You're the best type of guest for this situation. This is the ones that
awesome.
Jake and I don't have to say much. Go ahead.
I was going to ask you about the trauma history. So it was really fascinating to me that you used some phrase that I can't remember now because it was like 20 minutes ago. But the idea of not being trauma injured but trauma advantaged or something like that, because your inner city upbringing, when you went through the powder experience, you're like, I think you said something like, I'm home. And everything is normal, and the whoever was observing you pulled you aside and they're like, what happened there? And I think there's a real powerful lesson in there, and I don't know if you want to go this direction, but I do, so I'm going to ask you and here's why I don't know if we want to go this direction. I don't know if we want to give too much permission to people to just play fast and loose with the rules and say, oh yeah, my trauma history makes me like a superhero. It's like, well, maybe, right? But you have to be able to harness that energy. And if you don't know what it is and it's taken over you as opposed to the other way around, it can be very, very detrimental. So to that point, some of the most intelligent, entertaining people I talk to are the people who have been through lots of crap in their day. Combat deployed veterans, people raised in terrible environments, people who've overcome cluster B injuries from, people with cluster B personality disorders who have inflicted countless pain, small business owners. Like, now that I'm like 10 years into this endeavor, it's like you see some stuff when you're trying to run a business. Like, it wakes you up and matures you real fast. You think you know what you're doing going in because you're some hotshot smart guy, and it's like, no, you need the experience too, right? Those people are always a little more anchored. Not always, sorry. They're usually a little more anchored, a little more. They live within the guardrails. They're not as they don't take as many risks unless they're highly calculated. They have lots of stories to tell, but they're never about themselves, right? They're engaging, entertaining, intelligent, wise people. And I think, here's where I'm going with this. I think my profession tends to hear trauma, and of course everything's trauma these days, right? Because it's a grifting enterprise for those of us who make money off of it. But real actual trauma that like deeply, profoundly affects people, if left unattended, can create long-term negative impact. But I think what we do is we tend to handle these people like fragile eggs. And Mike regularly references like his encounters with veteran groups who say, thank you for not treating us like wounded animals, right? Like we're human beings who have been through bad stuff and we want to live our lives. Don't treat us like we're lesser thans. I think my profession does that. When we hear somebody who had a history of sexual battery or sexual assault, when we hear people who are raised in abuse, neglect, and violence, kids who have been bounced around the foster care system, folks with gang backgrounds, people who have been incarcerated, homelessness. Like we tend to come in and want to coddle and wrap in bubble wrap and pet them on the head and give them a bottle of water and tell them it'll be okay, instead of like meeting them where they are, which is highly resilient, if for no other reason they're still alive and in front of you, right? And I tend to take that direction maybe a little too hard, but I also want to speak encouragement and life into these people and be like, dude, you're stronger than you realize. And I tend to get blowback for it so I just stopped bringing it up with my peer colleagues. I'm like, dude, to stop treating them like they're fragile. But they've been damaged. I'm like, stop talking like that. That's not true. Your testimony is again, it's confirming my bias, so check me on this if I'm wrong. But it sounds like you access something you probably didn't know you had and is now advantageous to you. I want to hear more about that now that I've laid the background of the foundation.
Yeah, the term, as I understand it, is post-traumatic adaptation. It's the opposite of disorder, and I haven't seen any studies that suggest exactly how that happens, other than luck, because there's so much information you have to gather, and how do you? The thing with trauma is that there's no legal, ethical way to study how to drive positive trauma.
Right. Yeah,
Right.
we're not gonna ask permission to put people into terrible circumstances just to see how their brains respond.
Yeah, yeah. My buddy Torin, he has people sign waivers. Do you remember that old Berkeley experiment where they had students play the role of inmates and correctional officers?
Oh, that was
Stanford.
Stanford.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Stanford prison experiment. Yeah.
Yes, Stanford. You guys are awesome. Check me on that. But yeah, so it's kind of like that, right? Where they have to have consent, but they can have long-term unintended consequences. And so people that typically go through it are willing to risk it for the biscuit because they want that outcome. And so how do you create a negative experience but have a positive outcome? I can guess that one of the reasons why I maybe had positive adaptation could be because maybe it was a improvised prolonged exposure therapy through training and being able to redo or change the future is what I call it, right? Where when an incident happened in the future and I had a better outcome, that was positive reinforcement for me. And so that was more motivation for me to go back and train, and I'm better prepared every time. So I was getting this kind of feedback loop that the more I trained, the more I studied, the better the outcome I got. And that's what I think, this is pure speculation, may have resulted in that positive association with a violent experience. I am conflicted because the evidence shows that kids that have been traumatized tend to become high achievers. So as a parent, what does that mean for me? You know, if I want my kids to be a high achiever, do I have to be one of those dads that traumatize my kids just enough for them to be a high achiever? But also, if I apply so much trauma, they become high achievers. What good is it for them to be an astronaut if they're going to end up killing themselves eventually? Right. And so it's just kind of to your point about, so then do we just create a positive atmosphere for people to be traumatized? You know, there's no studies, and right now I think it's a matter of luck. I think that's where we get some high level operators where they somehow found a way to be high functioning with the amount of trauma they experience. But I haven't seen or learned about anything. It might be out there, but I don't have that personally. The knowledge of how and why that happens. That's definitely something I'm looking into.
It's a good conversation to have about how much and how far do we push anyone, but children in this case, because we have young children. And, you know, this is an age-old debate going back hundreds of years, thousands of years. You know, Spartans would send the kid out to, fend for himself when he's 12 years old or whatever. And I think that the proximate interpretation here is something balancing, developmental adaptation beyond one's comfort zone at appropriate times and durations such that you get growth. And I think, on the whole, the criticism of culture these days is that we've coddled. And Jonathan Haidt wrote a book called The Coddling of the American Mind. That's a mental coddling. There's also the physical coddling. And Haidt's work in this area is renowned, I think, at this point. I mean, his latest book, The Anxious Generation, talks about that as well, and talks about getting people off screens, and it talks about sending kids out and quote unquote into the wilderness. Things that I think give us pause because we've intake so much information now that says the world is evil and dangerous. Keep your kids from it. By the way, here's a device which actually gives them access to more evil and danger than they could ever encounter going to the park 3/4 of a mile away, statistically speaking and otherwise. But what we want to do is we want to do this controlled step in, almost like you referenced before with exposure therapy. It's exposure, growth, and development. So we're not just leaving our kids to go find their way home from the the camping trip 200 miles away, right?
Right.
But what we do want is on the camping trip, let them go run in the woods. They'll be
Yeah.
fine. They're presuming there's no bears around to eat them. But let them go run around the woods. Let them fall down, get a scrape, get a cut. And what this comes down to for me is for children and adults, people in my profession and others, if I don't know how to tolerate my own distress, I cannot watch somebody else in their distress, meaning I probably won't be interested in pushing somebody into distress of any kind, because I'm not going to be able to sit there and watch them endure it, knowing that on the back end, they'll be better off because it'll have trained the brain that it can go someplace and come back and be okay. Therefore, it can go another place and come back and it'll be okay. And the world won't spin off its axis just because we felt something. But if I don't know how to tolerate my own distress, I can't do it with anybody else. And this goes in my profession too. Oftentimes we'll be in a group setting, doing group counseling, for example, and somebody will start to get tearful. And almost immediately the hand comes out and it rests on the thigh, and somebody else reaches for the Kleenex box. And it's like, whoa. Let them go through that, because if you're bailing them out of the process, you're not doing them any favors. And what you're probably doing is trying to turn off the tears so you don't have to watch it. Not necessarily because you want to extend some compassion and assuage their pain. It's because you can't watch them cry. Now, we have to ask, well, why is that? Largely, it's because you haven't practiced it yourself. But beyond that, it has to do with self-efficacy. And in my view, the people who can endure others' pain best are the ones who know who they are. So if I know who I am really well, and I know what my emotional range is, I am better equipped to do things like set boundaries, because that inherently inflicts pain by somebody who can no longer cross my boundary because I'm not letting them. And then I can watch them yell and scream and froth at the mouth and, shake their fist, knowing that it's okay. They will tolerate it. They will get through it, because all emotional experiences have a beginning, a middle, and an end. Christian Conti. Take a drink.
Yeah, man. That's gold. You just drop some bombs right there. And I hope that the instructors and parents are listening, because that's so important. I remember growing up hearing that life is suffering from Buddhism, but I didn't really understand what that meant. Like, does that mean that we just have to suffer? But analogy or metaphor? One of those. I'm not an English
Metaphor.
lit.
No, it's a metaphor. Life is suffering. Life is pain, Highness. Anybody who tells you anything otherwise is selling something.
Right. And so something that helped me as a parent and as an instructor is, I think, analogy or metaphor of the cocoon of a moth becoming a butterfly. That if you're impatient, you see that little cocoon and you start slicing that open, the moth didn't go through the strain of developing the strength to break through that. Same thing with a chick hatching from an egg, or an alligator. If that's cool, guys, they want to be more.
Or a seed popping up from the earth. And those are analogies, by the way.
Thank you.
But what you're talking about is development, and any developmental theorist who studies any development of any kind, whether it's moral or psychological or spiritual or biological, they'll tell you that the only way to achieve growth is to go through disequilibrium. You cannot grow if you're in equilibrium. So you have to strain against something in order to grow. Now, if you don't want growth, cool, coddle yourself or your children or whatever, just never leave your hut. My bias is I want people to grow. And that's fine. That's my explicit bias. I want people to grow. So I'm gonna try to push them. And that's part of the waiver that you sign if you come into counseling. I'm gonna push you out of what you think you know into something greater, because ostensibly you've entered into my domain asking for help and you don't know where to apply the pressure. Okay, well then I'm going to take that and I'm going to give you my version of feedback to push you. So yes, if you slice open the cocoon or the chrysalis early, you're going to kill the butterfly or the moth.
1,000%.
Butterflies are just moths that people like. Flowers are just weeds that people like.
Yeah. But that speaks to the instructor side. My jiu-jitsu coach, Josh Morrow, does such a good job of creating an exploratory learning environment where he allows students to struggle with figuring out the technique, because he teaches concept-based rather than technique-based, right? This is also true for firearms training, is that you have what's called block practice, where it's really easy, like a free throw. If you stand in a static position and you just shoot the ball and you get really good at shooting the ball, you feel good about yourself. You look really good in practice. versus randomized practice where there's other variables. The analogy here would be like having you sprint up and down the basketball court, and the coach just randomly throws you the ball, and the second you touch it, you got to take the shot. You're going to be in an awkward position. You're going to have to process that information and reconstruct how you're going to take the shot and improvise the skills to apply it well enough to sink the basket. But you tend to perform poorer in practice, and you struggle, and there's strain, and it's hard, and it feels better if can I just shoot holes in holes? Can I just shoot holes in holes, right? So in watching students struggle to put the bullet where they intended it to go, because we're having them move laterally from the target, because our body is going to be compelled to move when we're under threat. By randomizing which target that we need to call out, we have different indicators, colors, numbers, shapes. It's difficult for them to be as good as a marksman as they normally are when they're in a controlled environment and they could just concentrate on that thing where they feel good about that. And so allowing ourselves as a parent or instructor to watch and embrace the struggle. Let them struggle, let them figure it out, create that exploratory learning environment. What they found in that study is that the block practice group lost more games than the random practice group, because the part that's overlooked is everything that you talked about, their ability to forget about what just happened and figure out a new way forward, that processing of information, that decision-making process. Mike, I think you're a race car driver, or you're at least into cars, but that's an analogy that tends to work well with my race car guys, is cornering, where you're trying to find the driving line on a racetrack that's all squiggly, and the fastest lap time is going to be how much distance you can cut by making as straight a line as possible. But what happens is that track conditions change. Your tires might lose some traction over time as it heats up. Your brake fluid might start to boil over a bit. So how you brake, your steering input, it's all going to change based on what's happening with the car. And if you screw up that corner, you got to let it go and just keep looking down the track for the next corner and adjust accordingly. If you get fixated on the mistake you just made, it's still happening. You're still moving forward, and you're going to screw up the rest of your driving line if you don't let that go. And so allowing that struggle, permitting failures to happen, and just being the old mantra, front sight focused, which we don't do in defensive shooting. Go into that later. But looking down the track, looking up, keeping your head up, being okay with the struggle, both as the end user and as the instructor or parent, watching your students or kids struggle and strain and figure it out through that exploratory process.
Go
How
ahead,
Mike.
did you make the transition into shooting?
In what regards?
In just life.
Oh, that's a great question. I used to hate guns. I was an anti-gunner. Can you believe that? So remember Colors, the old Bang Bang movie? Yeah, so that was kind of the environment I grew up in. And a joke that I often talk about is that Asians don't get like Devo from Friday, generally don't get that muscular, right? And so like you can't get real buff and like, oh, don't fight that dude. You know, that dude's big. Well, Asians generally don't get that big, but we train.
Have martial arts, right?
That's it. And so it was usually the guy that did Kali, that did some kind of Aikijitsu, that did Jiu-Jitsu, that did Muay Thai. Those are the guys that had that street cred. Like, don't mess with that dude, right? And then I was also from that culture of guns were for cowards that didn't know how to fight, right? That was kind of the environment I grew up in. And being Filipino in San Diego, you're typically either a gang member or you're completely focused on books, which I definitely was not. Can have a whole tangent about the public education system, but or you're like a Jabberwocky, or congrats to Jabberwockies. I never got paid to break dance. But
wait, whoa, what's that term?
That's a Vegas reference. He just threw a Vegas reference in.
Oh,
that sounds like a Star Wars character, a Jabberwocky.
They're amazing. So Jabberwocky is a figment of your imagination, and this is an old b-boy group from different parts of San Diego, Sacramento, different areas, but they got their reputation from a TV show called America's Best Dance Crew, and then they eventually got a contract to perform in Las Vegas. And they're so successful that they were able to sell the brand, and now they have like new people. They wear a mask. It's kind of like what's that
like
old
Blue Man Group?
Kabuki? Is that what it is when they're wearing a mask? Yeah, but yeah, they're phenomenal.
How have I never heard of this? It's so weird.
Yeah,
okay.
I'm shocked you haven't, especially since you have kids. Like, I mean, if you take I took my daughters to go see the Jabberwockies, and it is an incredible experience. And these guys can just dance their ass off. Like, it's insane.
Yeah. So the stereotype is that Filipinos are like dancers, DJs, and karaoke guys. I didn't get any of those genetics, really. But but we would throw house parties in San Diego as a DJ, and I would try to break dance and like sprain my wrist or whatever. But we would always get shot up. We were always getting shot up. And so that kind of fed into like, can you guys just fight? Can you stop killing people and just fight? And so it wasn't until later when my martial arts instructor got me a job to keep me away from trouble. Some of my classmates, we got into a lot of trouble. And some guys got thrown in jail. And so he was very strict about us not getting into street fights, not doing any of that stuff. So he got me into security. And I later learned that I could have a gun on the job. And I was like, oh, wait a minute, good guys could carry guns. And that's when I became exposed to the idea of guns for defensive purposes, not just for murder or for law enforcement. Both gang members and cops hated me. So that was a negative association at the time. But once, and it also dawned on me too, that like, I'm not always going to be young. I'm going to be injured. I could be sick. I won't be able to fight my way out physically, but you can press the trigger if there's a lethal force encounter and still save your life, right? And so, getting jumped in high school was like a common thing, and now we call it disparity of force, right? That we minimize and normalize a lot of the violence we grew up in, but it's pretty damn significant in retrospect. And when I see high school kids now, I'm like, holy crap, I was doing what at 14, at 13 years old, carjacking and like bats and just bad stuff. I won't go into too much detail because I'm still friends with a lot of people who just got out of prison. But that's kind of what segued me into things. And during this time period, I didn't know too much. I went to high school with a friend named Mike Dasargo, and he went off into naval special warfare.
I didn't know you guys went to high school together.
High school with Omari? Yeah.
He was a breakdancer too. And I have an old cassette.
Oh, what?
Hold up.
Okay. All right.
I have an old cassette of him freestyle rapping. So we had an old X-Clan beat going, and we were on my mom's karaoke machine, and we were just spitting bars. And
wow.
So, oh my goodness. Yeah. You remember when Coleon said, there is a tape of me rapping, and if it ever gets out, I will lose my mind. Like, now we've got.
Yeah.
Did you ever rap? Are you on the tape, Mike?
No.
Oh, darn. I was gonna say 3. We have 3 amateur rappers now, but it's only 2. We gotta get Omari on the show.
I tried.
Anyway,
I'm not gonna lie. I mean, I tried, but I don't have the pipes for this. My voice sounds weird, and but my friends have it because we used to perform because it was cool. I never got paid because I was an idiot, but yeah, I mean, it was a thing. It was kind of our outlet. It was just hip hop was our outlet. It really was. The creativity behind hip hop, the graffiti art. They call it the elements of hip hop, right? B-boying, DJing, breakdancing, graffiti art, all that good stuff. It was kind of like a positive influence in our life. But yeah, that was Omari. He went off to blow up bridges and all that good stuff. And then when he came back out, we met up, and he told me that the guys were going outside of naval special warfare to get better training because their training sucked. And he went to go see Tony Blauer with the Spear System, and then he went to go see Rob Pincus. And when I was invited,
please tell me Rob has a freestyle rap tape.
Oh, absolutely, he does it to this day.
Yeah, he does it over Yacht Rock.
Over Yacht Rock, that's his freestyle. He will freestyle.
He freestyles over Yacht Rock beats.
He was doing Yacht Rock while we were eating iguana tacos in Puerto Rico.
He loves
wild. That's his thing, man.
I love Yacht Rock too. I'm not going to rap to it, but
it's the remix, bro. But so Rob changed my trajectory during instructor development because he started talking about this brain stuff. He started talking about the startle reaction, and that started to make sense reflecting on some experiences I had. That's when I learned the term tachypsychia, the slow motion time, all that stuff. And I tried to push back, and I asked, well, what's the duration? I felt like such an idiot for asking that question because he just looked at me dead in the eye. He said, non-zero. I'm like, okay, yeah. And like the more I kept digging and digging, the more it confirmed to this day. Like this is an old program. This is like at least a decade old, but I know it goes to the early 2000s. It's a decade old for me at least. But I know it goes, I think he started like 2004, 2005 during the holidays. But all the drills and everything, I'm finding more and more evidence to support the design. And I don't know if he got a download, if he's like secretly hacked into aliens and they're giving him this information, but he's like, it's insane how advanced, light years ahead the program is. When you asked earlier about why don't more people know about this, I don't freaking know. It's been around since the mid 2000s. I mean, he's taught SWAT, he's taught high level operators, but there's a few reasons why people are averse to it. Usually because they don't like the struggle of being told that they're an idiot.
Yeah.
So,
Ego.
yeah, ego is not your amigo. And personally, like I was that target too. Like I get humiliated all the time, but survival is way more important than my feelings. And so that's what helped me just look past some of the berating things and disparaging things. It's like, when I put my brain into it, I was like, well, you're right. So I can't push back on that. I am an idiot. The whole Gordon Ramsay, what are you? I'm an idiot sandwich.
I'm an idiot sandwich.
So, yeah, I mean, I just got to man up and just accept, because survival is far more important than my reputation. If I need to be humiliated to be better, then humiliate me. I seek that. So I appreciate getting spot checked. I appreciate all the feedback, because none of that's going to be there for me if someone's trying to kill my kids and I need to be able to apply these skills and create a better outcome.
One of the things that just changed, I don't know how recent it is, but it's recent enough for me to notice it, was the bladed stance, right? The Weaver stance versus the triangle, feet shoulder width apart. And I went through the police academy back in 2005, and they were teaching the bladed stance. And, it's like, the idea is to shrink your profile. And it's like, yeah, but you expose all these organs, right? All the things that, like, I now know after learning from, learning differently from new instructors, and then later Rob explaining it. It was a hard thing to turn my head around because I practiced it for so long one way, right? So first of all, you got the habit in place. The neural networks are very challenging to change. You have to have a desire. There's that old saying that says, how many therapists does it take to change a light bulb? One, but the light bulb has to want to change, right? It's like, so you have to have the desire, but then you have to have the humility to receive the feedback. And that's where the ego comes in. It's like, no, this works. I'm just going to do it. It's like, does it work optimally? And do you know? How do you know? And if somebody comes along with a better idea and can explain it with some level of articulation, I think you probably need to pay attention. Now, you can disagree, but you better have a better disagreement than their articulation of why you need to change. And what sucks these days is everybody's looking for data. And it's like, well, show me the data. Where's the research? Where's the published peer-reviewed paper with the randomized control trial? It's like, I don't know. I just have a good idea, and we have to start somewhere. Would you like to listen to it? Yeah. And that honestly sometimes is dead on arrival with people who have fragile egos, longstanding habits, and then it's not just the individuals; it's the system that's teaching this, that has its own ego and its own individuals with longstanding habits, protecting the way, right? Capital T, capital W, the way.
Yeah.
And it's like, and this is why I preach so frequently about separating self from activities. You are not your job. You are not your hobbies. You are not what you own, right? You're not your possessions. The essence of you is very different than the things you do. But if you've married those two, if you've conflated what you do with who you are, then changing what you do is tantamount to a threat to self. And the brain will respond in such a way that it seems like you yourself are being attacked, and you'll have a limbic defensive response simply because somebody said, hey, why don't you try holding the gun this way with your thumbs down the rail, right? Which is actually a true story Dustin Pluth told me back at Train and Learn. So it's like shooting all over the place. He's like, put your thumbs on the rail. And I'm like, on the rail? You mean on the slide? He's like, yeah, on the slide right there. And I was like, he goes, don't worry, you're not going to stop this thing. I was like, no, I'm worried about getting pinched. And then all of a sudden, boom, 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 rounds go on target. And I was like, you're a genius, bro. Like, but if I hadn't had the humility and the ego strength to receive that feedback, I'd still be shooting inaccurately. So it's really hard to get that through to people when they're resistant, or they've conflated what they do with who they are, and they don't have, again, back to a good sense of self. If you know who you are, you can not only set boundaries, allow people to tolerate distress, but then receive it yourself, knowing that the limit of who you think you are has not been reached yet.
Yeah, and funny story, I actually have the studies that support why we don't shoot from that position, and it's called the current hypothesis is the forget reconstruction hypothesis. So this goes back to the basketball analogy, right? Shooting from the bladed stance is shooting the free throws because there's absolutely better ways to stabilize their platform to be a really good marksman. But when we're talking about defensive shooting, it's much more like the player that's running up and down the court, touching the ball, and then shooting the ball from an unrehearsed position. They just need to apply the skills well enough to make sure the ball goes in the basket. It's the same thing with defensive shooting. We just need to shoot well enough to make sure that the rounds go where you intended it to go, right? And so the idea behind, so with the read, plan, do, we're talking about the do side now, why we don't predetermine our shooting stance. We like to shoot from a natural neutral position, but it's going to be whatever position you're in. And if we're talking about moving laterally, we're likely going to have to put ourselves in a squared position to stop that lateral movement, right? And so to take it further, we could be in any position. For moving around a corner, try not to get off frame here, but for moving around a corner, it might be weighted over 1 foot. And if we're shooting around corners, and kind of illustrate, my words aren't wording.
You're not balanced, in other words.
Yeah, you're off balance, absolutely. And so what really matters is your trigger press, your grip, and for recoil management, shoulders in front of the hips. Foot position doesn't matter. It's all incidental. We need to be able to apply the fundamentals in such a way that the rounds go where we intend it to go. We need to get away from maximizing stability because most circumstances don't call for that. Now, if you're taking like a 40-yard shot or something for an active killer circumstance, then you would adjust your platform to be more stable for that shot. But what's happened in the training industry is that we've become the Harlem Globetrotters, where it's entertaining. We see the Harlem Globetrotters do some amazing things, and then we train to be like that. But I mean, they don't win NBA championships, right? When you watch an NBA game, when people shoot, there's kind of a fundamental way to sink those baskets. But a lot of times, you look at the way they improvise as they go for a layup, that wasn't really planned. There's some fundamental concepts with how they did that layup, but they didn't do it the exact same way every time. So that's that forget and reconstruct. You have a plan of how you're going to do it, then there's some kind of disruption, and you adjust to that disruption, and you take the shot. And so fundamentally speaking, that's when we want to be in a natural, neutral, athletic position rather than a predetermined 1 foot forward fighting stance, because when you're not in that stance, can you still apply those skills? If you get overly reliant on having the left foot forward or the right foot forward, then it feels weird to take a shot in a position that's not that. And that's going to be another
not reality. Yeah. Well, and I see Brandon Covey is watching. I don't know if he's still watching, but he posted, he's like, we need to have Jonathan Haidt to the Christian Conti drinking game. But the point is, if you're a clinician listening to this, especially if you're a junior clinician, same concepts. They can teach you stuff about CBT and cognitive errors and all this stuff and thinking distortions. They can teach you how to validate, and they can teach you all these things to apply in the session until your patient is yelling at you. Right? Like you can't go in with a script. That's not how reality works. And it's certainly not how human beings work. So this has general applicability across probably every environment where you'd ever learn something and then go to try to apply it in real life.
Absolutely. 1000%, man. 1000%. That's where that cognitive function, our brain function, we always talk about on the training side, using the best gear that you got. And then people often criticize obese instructors. Like, I want to trust that guy to teach me. He's not even in shape. He can't even run 20 yards or whatever. But what about our brain function? Like, why don't we prime our brain? Why don't we take care of our mental health and then go beyond that? So if we go back to the rehabilitation analogy I used earlier, imagine the fitness industry. If like 24 Hour Fitness, I believe, was Family Fitness. Before that, was something else. But most gyms, physical fitness gyms, was a derivative of physical rehabilitation, which is why those machines isolated to muscle groups as they did, like the preacher curl machine or whatever it was, is because it was focused on rehab. And then the fitness industry has gotten so much further to functional training, strength and conditioning, all kinds of amazing discoveries, because we want beyond just fixing what's broken. And I believe that the same can remain true with our cognitive function. Once we get the mental health side fixed, I shouldn't say fixed, but optimized, right? Because it's a gradient. It's not absolutely broken. It could just
it's busted.
Yeah.
It's busted.
Yeah. And then once we get to a place where it's like, oh, this is what it's like to be normal-ish, to have a kind of a normal function, then we could explore the true potential of what our mind is capable of, whether that's cognitive function, emotional functioning, or beyond. I have a friend, Mikhail Vega is what he goes by now. He changed his name when he was on the teams. He was known as Hooch. He has a very bad reputation on the teams. He was a really dark dude. He was diagnosed with Naval Special Warfare's worst case of operator syndrome. He just had to keep going and keep going and keep going. Nothing worked for him. They kind of used him as a guinea pig through all kinds of different drugs at him to try to fix his brain, and it made him worse. He looks physically different today, and he credits Kundalini meditation as being transformative for him. You could find him on Sean Ryan podcast, Mikhail Vega. He has a good elaborate story about his evolution. His social media shows some pictures of Hooch and pictures of Mikhail. He's now the motion capture director for Call of Duty. He's an amazing human being. He's still him. You know, he hasn't detached from his old self, but he's come such a long way. And it's an amazing thing witnessing his potential going beyond just healing and the things that he could do now with his creativity, because he's allowed his mind and consciousness to expand above and beyond just getting fixed. That's an amazing pathway that goes beyond just training. But there's more in our brain that we could prime, just like fitness. Like we're seeing people do amazing things with CrossFit. Seeing athletes do amazing things with their body, parkour, like you can't do parkour with an injury, right? But there's amazing things we could do with our brain if we start with the fundamentals of taking care of your mental health first.
And I think that, what you just said about the fitness industry, if it sprung from rehabilitation, we still have both, right? We still have the targeted rehabilitation people in the physical therapy world, and then we have the personal trainers, and then we have the solo gyms where you can work on stuff yourself. I don't know why we can't do that with this realm, and maybe we do. Maybe it looks like corporate training, and there are people out there who are consultants and coaches and all that stuff, and maybe we do have the stratification. But from my view, it's inadequate. I think what we need is a mental health 24-hour fitness, right? Run by people who don't necessarily have licenses bestowed upon them by the state, ascertaining minimum competence, and then all the rules and restrictions thereto pertaining, because that's not what's being asked. We're not in a medical environment anymore. When you're down at the local fitness club lifting weights, you don't need a medical doctor looking at your form. So let the medical doctor be in the medical office. And if somebody just wants to go work out and their form sucks, okay, well, they're going to figure it out. But maybe we need people who are just roaming around, who know a little bit more about the training than everybody else, and they can be paid, and then we can call them personal trainers, right? Like, why can't we do that with mental health? Why can't I open up a place for people to just go hang out on couches and have conversations that are structured? Why does it have to be in this overly rigid presentation where we're billing insurance and creating files and documentation and treatment plans and diagnoses? It's like, can't people just like heal each other? Or maybe we do, and we just call that Buffalo Wild Wings. I have no idea.
Yeah, we just call it the bar. You know what I mean? It's just usually, ask any bartender, they'll tell you that they're a therapist for a lot of people.
Well,
ask
what
any bar stool
is what people consider consciousness communities, but that's become labeled as like woo, where you have these people into spirituality. They'll get together for some kava, and they'll be able to get in a space where they can feel that positivity, but it's not to the degree that you're talking about. I really think you guys are laying down the groundwork, starting with your anonymous online screening, right? Where people go online and just see where they're at. It's kind of like the old Beachbody programs where they have an online subscription and can kind of watch and go along. I think that's where your emotional functioning serves that platform, where they can learn how to exercise, right? When they watch it.
That's not a bad idea. I'm thinking like Peloton.
Yeah, 1,000%. You know, when I watch
That's
emotional,
not a bad idea.
I keep going back to your emotional functioning videos, and I take something new away every time. Every time I just go back and rewatch it. I do try to go into the book by Conti and all that, but like I like your face better. It's so handsome and with the beard. So I gotta watch that YouTube. I gotta see Jake.
You know, and I don't want to gloss over that. That's a hell of a compliment you just paid me. And you know, my ego is like, oh, this old thing, right? Those old videos. And Kevin helped produce those, by the way. So credit to Kevin Barry for the graphic design and his partner Stacy at Marketing Stable, because I produce this stuff and I just post it and then I don't watch it again because why? I know what I have to say. But somebody came in the other day and they were like, oh, it was so funny when you were like dunking that basketball on the video. And I was like, what are you even talking about? I had to go watch the video again. And it was cute. It was clever. It made me laugh. And so Kevin and Stacey did a great job with those videos. But it's incredibly important to me to hear you say that, because a lot of times, actually just this week, I was belly aching to my wife about it. I was like, does anything I do even matter? And we don't know the ripple effect of things that we touch and people we influence. And it's not always measured in quantifiable metrics by Google hits and YouTube views and that kind of thing. So thank you for saying that. It's really touching. And as much as I want to be like, ha ha ha, I'm just trying to make the world a better place, like it really does. It really hits me. So thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Thank you for putting it out there. And I can't stress enough how much it's like that at home gym. You know, your road rage analogy paints a perfect picture. And if you don't mind talking about that, because anger having the utility to take action, but we tend to unhealthily and inappropriately replace fear with anger, right? That road rage analogy. Could you talk a bit about that, or can you share that for the audience, just because I want to hear it again for my selfish reasons?
Yeah. So I actually don't know if this is an original of mine or if I heard it from somebody else. It might have actually been Christian who taught it to me, but I can't remember because my brain doesn't go back to 2007 anymore. But the idea is anger is one of our 10 core emotions that I teach from Carol Izard's work, and Izard's book, The Psychology of Emotions, is where this is all drawn from, and you can see it on the video. But anger is one of the 10 core emotions, and 10 core emotions means that they all have a discrete, unique purpose. So they have their own function separate and apart from all the other emotions. And there's only 10 of them because Izard discovered that there aren't any more than that. And what you were talking about is a hybrid of emotion or a hybrid of emotion and thought. So anger is a very important discrete emotion. However, my interpretation of this, after all the studying that I've done, and a lot of this comes from dialectical behavioral therapy, founded by Marsha Linehan and taught to me by Alan Frazzetti, who's now in Boston. But anger is always a secondary emotion. And I have not yet heard an argument that says that it's not. I can't think of anger being primary as far as order of events sequentially. Anger does not come first. If anything, surprise probably comes first all the time, and then something else follows, because surprise's job is to reboot our brain and clear everything out, whatever we may be doing. It just helps to reorient and then say, hey, pay attention, something else is coming. So if the experience, and I know people are going to say yes, but it feels like anger is the only thing that comes to me. And I would push back and say that's only because of your conditioning. You have conditioned or been taught over the years that anger is the only thing you feel, because all the other emotions have been invalidated along the way. But my argument would be, it is not the first thing you feel. It is not the second thing you feel after surprise. It probably seems that way because you have practiced so poorly feeling fear or shame or sadness that you just reach for anger because it gives the brain something to feel, because the brain needs to feel something in order to complete the loop. But it's the wrong thing. And so what happens is, in a road rage incident, and this is the example I use, but it could be anything where you feel anger, look for what's behind the anger. Now, in road rage, generally we feel fear first, because you're traveling 70 miles an hour and somebody else is traveling 74 miles an hour and they cut you off and cause distress, right? And your heart leaps into your throat and your pupils widen and your fingers tingle and they grip the wheel and you hit the brakes. And that effect of the adrenaline, the cortisol, whatever you're feeling that moment is fear, because there's a threat or a danger present. And that threat or danger is to self or others if you're traveling with passengers. So if you're not good at dealing with fear because you've been told forever and ever and ever that boys aren't to be scared, that's a wussy feeling. It makes you weak or whatever, right? Instead of feeling the actual fear, you'll get, fill in the blank with me, pissed, right? And you'll shoot the rod through the windshield at people and you'll flip them off. And maybe, if you're really unstable, you'll reach for your pistol and wave it at them or whatever. And then maybe you chase down the highway and, I'm going to get him back. I'm going to cut him off. And you do Clark Griswold and Christmas Vacation. You want to drive behind somebody who acts like that? Okay, here's the problem. That doesn't complete the cycle or the loop appropriately in your brain neurologically because you felt the wrong thing. So what ends up happening is you go throughout the day and then you end up coming home and maybe that thing occurred at 9:30 in the morning, but you come home through the door and you're like, you're not going to believe what happened to me on the highway. This asshole just cut me out. It's like, well, how long ago was that? That was like 7 hours ago. Why are you still feeling it? It's because you didn't actually appropriately embrace the fear and go, whew. Check the passengers, create some space, make sure you're still traveling. All right, let's go about our day. We can feel the fear, crest the wave, go through the other side. It's fine. Everybody moves on to our appointments or whatever. And then we come home at the end of the day and it's like we forgot all about it because we've processed it properly. Now, if you don't process it properly and instead you reach for anger or you reach for contempt or something like that, you're going to hang on to it and you're going to have a residue and you're going to have a stacking effect. And if you do that long enough, chronically over time, you're going to end up deteriorating your mind, your body, because those neurochemicals have to go somewhere. And if they don't go out appropriately, they're going to be stuck at a cellular level physiologically, and you're going to end up with pains and aches and all sorts of things. But you're going to reach for bottles and pills to cover it up because your brain can only process so much. So it's important to analyze what you're feeling when you're feeling it at the appropriate time and have, again, the ego, humility, and strength to say, it's okay to be scared. Some dude cut me off because he wasn't paying attention. And I don't need to get angry at him because he also has his reasons for cutting me off. Now, I may judge those reasons as not good, but they're still reasons. Now, what if it's a quote unquote good reason? He's racing to the hospital because he broke his leg and can't wait for the ambulance because he lives 20 miles out of town. Now, do I have more compassion for that? If he's just some oblivious dude not paying attention because he's high on cannabis and wants to feel some adrenaline, is that appropriate? Probably not appropriate, but it's still a reason. And I still have to let it go because I'm not in charge of him. I'm not driving his car. And if it's something like he's racing to an appointment because he's late, because he woke up late or spilled something on his shirt and had to get a new one. Haven't we all been there? Right. So we can have compassion for this thing without reaching for the rage. We can just go, whoo, that was scary. Whew. Move along. And then we don't have to chase him down, blowing past exit after exit, being late for our own appointments, then creating more rage. So that's the road rage analogy.
It's so amazing, man. He dropped so many knowledge bombs in there. And that's exactly why that whole idea of you don't have time to feel, just act, where yes, anger does motivate us to take action, but if that becomes our default, it becomes maladaptive over time. And we could see that. We could see how it actually shortens our lifespan if we continue down that pathway. And I think that emotional functioning, everything you just described, and understanding the utility of emotions, how to process it, how to close that loop, can give us not only a healthy way to come back to our families and to live our daily life, but also in defensive shooting, be able to do our job. Because the shooting part, we get surprised, and then we might get fearful, or we might get angry, or a little bit of both, and then we have to respond. But the fight's not over yet, because there might be other CCW carriers, other good guys with guns that we have to be cognizant of. We see too many unfortunate videos of cops shooting CCW carriers that just shot someone in self-defense. But that's the risk that we take when we bring the gun out. We shoot somebody. We need to have the capability of processing that, not getting fixated on what just happened, go through it and assess our environment. Look over, let's see if there's other good guys, other threats that we need to address, or if anybody is hurt for that matter. It's not that we don't have time to feel, because we are going to feel. And I think what you described is a healthy way to feel and to close that loop. So again, just so much gratitude for, I know that I'm a guest on the show, but I'm a student of what everything you guys have to say. I think you guys are doing an amazing work, trailblazing, and if I can help and contribute, I'm just going to keep reposting everything you just said, because I think that that really helps with the cognitive function and the information processing. It's a critical part of our ability to apply skills and produce a positive outcome, not just in the immediate aftermath of a defensive shooting, but the long-term aftermath of what we have to process and get through.
Yeah. Well, and even if you don't discharge your weapon, there's still a result neurologically and physiologically by engaging in an encounter that required such a defense, right? So like we have to be mindful of that too. Steve in the live stream chat here, which is something new I didn't know we had, but apparently we have live stream chat on Riverside as well, says, love this conversation on how to promote mental wellness and a spectrum of community support. I wonder how much of the existing mental health industrial complex prevents simpler, cheaper community solutions. I want to answer that as briefly as I can without chucking anybody too far under the bus. I think that we as clinicians in the professional realm, so you're talking professional counseling, professional psychotherapy, we come into the office, we bill your insurance, all that. I think we have an ego issue whereby we create a dependence, and it's as much about us wanting to feel like we're contributing as it is about the patients becoming dependent upon us because they feel better when they leave the session, that we're not trying hard enough to work ourselves out of a job. And I'm not even joking, every single time I've presented this to somebody who's in the profession and I say, I'm trying to work myself out of a job. This is why I produce free content like podcasts and YouTube videos, and I host graduate practicum students, and I teach all over the place, and I don't charge for it. If people want to pay me, that's cool. I'm not going to turn out money, but that's not how I lead the conversation, because I want the community healthy so that I don't have to do this anymore. And every single time, it's like they've never heard that before. All they've heard is treat your patients, move on to the next patient. And there's an underlying presupposition that patients stay on the calendar until they want to get off. And that is not at all appropriate for any profession anywhere. We are the only ones who do that. Your doctor absolutely hits goals and discharges you. Your physical therapist, your dentist, your auto mechanic, your attorney does not keep charging you after the case is settled, right? No one does that but us. The professional drives the termination point. They say, you've hit your goals, you're healthier than when you walked in. Is there anything else you want to work on? And then if we're truly billing the insurance, we have to make sure that we're hitting criteria for the disorder, and it is a disorder and it is a medical model. Then we readjust and we get a new treatment plan. We move forward. If it's not, that's not therapy anymore. That's consultation. And you can go be a consultant. That's fine, but don't call it therapy. So yes, I think that there is an invested, probably unconscious desire to keep people in treatment longer than they have to. So there is a motivation there. There's an incentive structure that runs counter to the idea of creating a healthy community. If I create a healthy community, I have to stop being a therapist because nobody will be sick. Now, we can debate whether or not that will ever actually happen. It doesn't matter. The point is, that's my optimism and that's my hope and that's my goal, right? Okay. I have to be strong enough to separate therapist as a job from therapist as an identity in order for that to happen. And I think way too many of us say, I am therapist. That's all I'll ever be. And that's also why most of us can't retire at an appropriate age either. And we're working into our 80s. They just don't know who they are without the job. So there's an inappropriate role conflation with therapist as job and therapist as identity. And I referenced that earlier. So the other thing that's going on too is that we've become such an instant gratification driven society that if we can reach for something quick and down and dirty and easy to alleviate our symptoms, like Strattera or Vyvanse or an SSRI or anything else, then I feel better, but I'm not actually better. And there's that incentive structure built in as well. So the pharmaceutical industrial complex is contributing to this too. And we need to learn how to return to good health, good balance in life, in our endeavors, get some hobbies, make some friends, do fun things, and don't necessarily reach for chemical influence. And I'll say this again, because I've said it before, humanity in its current iteration as Homo sapiens have been around for like 40,000 years. And the profession of professional psychotherapy has been around for like 120. Like, we ain't exactly old. Now, yes, we can argue that there's always been shaman and medicine men and all those sorts of things. but they weren't the order of the day. That's not how human beings healed each other. Human beings healed each other by hanging out with each other and consoling and moving forward together. I think we've become atomized as a society to the point that we now have to look to a professional to solve our problems instead of looking to our communities and our neighbors, which requires that we have some. But if we're atomized because we're all on our damn devices, then it's going to be really hard to trust those people and lean in and be vulnerable so that we can be intimate enough to get the things healed at their communication and their presence. So again, emotional functioning, begets vulnerability, which begets intimacy, which begets camaraderie and neighborly, correspondence. Without that stuff, we just become isolated, and I think things get worse. So that's how much I think the existing mental health complex prevents simpler, cheaper community solutions. And to that point, there's a whole bunch of us who identify as our jobs in realms like homelessness prevention and suicide prevention and harm reduction and all the things. It's like, well, if these all went away by getting upstream from it, which is what WTTA tries to do, if we prevented all this stuff and everybody's truly healthy, and we only had a fraction of the population that actually needed services, what does that mean for those people in those roles? Are they ego healthy enough to say, I don't need to be suicide prevention coordinator anymore because our suicide numbers are so low that I don't need to exist? Could we do that? Or are we just funding it in perpetuity because that's the way it's always been? Just like some of the instructions we talked about regarding firearms.
Yeah, and you hit something on the head, and this is me thinking out loud now, is the healthcare industry is mainly there when things are broken. And it's everything that you said, that you just throw drugs at them and get the next patient in. But we're starting to see a movement of health optimization. People like Dr. Kyle Gillette, Dr. Adia, Dr. Gabrielle Lyons, who was also just on the Sean Ryan show. They're starting their own private practice to optimize health and go beyond just fixing things. Is that something that you guys might consider as like a mental health optimization rather than just fixing broken things?
You guys, meaning me and Mike, yeah, but you guys as a profession, it's not even a conversation we have. It's literally not discussed at any conference, any continuing ed, ever, anywhere at all, because I think we're just married to the role of like savior. We love putting on our capes and flying in and helping people and then feeling good about ourselves. It's like, yeah, until they come back. I don't ever want to see you again. If you come into my office, I want to teach you some sustainable skills that require you never to enter my door again. Like if I have it in my head from grad school, why can't I just teach it to you so you go heal yourself? I think that should be the goal, not like some magic wand that I wave or lever that I pull behind a curtain you don't have access to. That's not appropriate. Mike?
Yeah. No, I agree. We're getting here to the end. First of all, Mike, you've been a great guest. You've been a great guest, and I think you do have a great voice. I think you sound a little bit like Money B from Digital Underground.
Oh snap, son!
So I think you could have rapped well over those X-Clan beats with Amari. I'll have to text him later and see if I get a copy of that. Maybe that could be our new theme music when we come in, Jake.
We can make that happen.
No, you've been a great guest. I'm glad we had you on. It's probably long overdue. And I want to get you back eventually. I think you probably do a whole episode on the ketamine treatments.
I'd love that. Yeah.
Yeah. Just because it's just something, it's so counterintuitive for a lot of gun owners to think like, we've been told you can't own guns if you do drugs and drugs are bad and everything like that. So it would be great to kind of have you break that down. But,
yeah, the ketamine treatment it's legal. It's an actual.
Absolutely. And I think most of our listeners at this point know what we're talking about when we're talking about ketamine treatment. But it's just hard for people to still wrap their head around. Well, now I have to resort to something that's considered a street drug. Right. You see what I mean? Like ketamine, depending on your view of it, could come as something dangerous and scary, or it could be something healing, like most drugs. Right? But
the poison.
Yeah. So, but how do you tend to your mental health now? Like, what are you doing these days?
Meditate every night. Ongoing Kundalini practitioner. I started with Taoist meditation during my upbringing in martial arts. And since then, I've been studying with Vital Warrior. They're a 501c3 nonprofit organization. They treat military veterans. They have public classes. They also do private classes for both operators and intelligence community. But that practice has been profound in exploring the highest potential that I might be capable of. The emotional function plays a critical role in all of that, on my day-to-day activities and everything. And the meditation helps clear out a lot of stuff. It also helps within the meditation, because sometimes when you're deep in your meditation, some stuff might come up, and understanding that emotions have a utility. When something comes up in my meditation and I feel an emotion, it helps me with my metacognition, where I can start taking a third person perspective, which ketamine helps with, and be able to see, oh, that feeling exists. That's a signal to do this based on the utility that's reflected in that emotion. And so it's absolutely complemented my meditation practice.
I love hearing that. Thank you.
Oh, thank you guys for all the work you guys do. It's groundbreaking for sure. And I hope more people start to hear the value in it. And I'm going to keep sipping for it. I'm going to keep pushing it out there. Learn emotional functioning. You don't realize how important it is. It's like such a, you break the veil with that thing, man. Like we really don't realize how much we're slave to emotions. And we serve emotions rather than emotions serving us.
Yeah, that's a really good, that should be a bumper sticker. That's really good. Do you have the flyer, by the way? The 10 emotions with the QR code? All right, good.
Yes. Yes.
All right, if anybody needs any of this stuff, shoot us an email and we'll send it to you too. You can distribute it wherever you are, however you see fit around your training areas, your ranges. If you're a clinician, hang it in your office, hand it out. Just shoot us an email. I mean, give attribution, that would be nice, but teach this stuff. It's important. So thank you, Mike, for taking the time away from your kid's birthday party down there at
Great Wolf Lodge. This is part of that high achievement goal. I'm going to neglect them so you can feel the right amount of trauma. It's all by design. This works perfectly.
Daddy, I went down the big slide by myself. And you're like, oh, guess I could have been there, but I was too busy shooting the breeze with Mike and Jake. Oh, good. Go swim in the salty chlorinated water. It just sounds terrible. Thank you, everybody, for listening along and participating. And again, give us a rating and review and share it around. That's what they say that helps drive this stuff. Subscribe or whatever. And until next time, on behalf of the Walk the Talk America family, thank you. And we wish you all great mental wellness. Bye-bye.